Good evening, everyone. Happy Hanukkah. Tonight is the sixth night of Hanukkah. It's also a new month, a good Chodesh. So it's a good time to continue studying. Hanukkah is a time for Torah in general, and especially for the inner light of the Torah, the oil of the Torah. So we've been learning the last two Thursday nights a fascinating discourse about redemption and peace, Padah Beshalom nafshi, and how this refers to the Mashiach's times when our redemption from exile is going to be in peace. So what does that mean? We were learning how it applies to the internal human conflict. We have a conflict between our godly side that wants to live a life completely mindful of purpose and dedicated to purpose. And then there is the animal side in man the animal side in the human being that wants to live a selfish life geared towards momentary pleasures and delights, forgetting about a higher purpose, wants to just be comfortable and the like. And we were learning that there are various different levels of how to the holy side, the godly side, should overcome the unholy side. So we were learning that there is the conflict on the level of nefesh, ruach, neshama, where there is an intense battle between the two souls. One is trying to create the holy excitement and drive, but they're using their mind through meditation, and that's primarily during prayer, and that's why prayer is a time we learned of fierce battle, because when the animal soul feels threatened, the lower base human feels threatened by the higher, more idealistic human. When it feels it kind of will try to distract the soul and will fire up all kinds of unholy thoughts and sometimes even shockingly ugly thoughts. But then we learned that there's a higher level when we reveal the transcendent encompassing powers of our soul, which is called the level of Chai. When we introduce that and we experience a pure love to God that transcends reason and understanding, the natural love, that the drive that the soul has to God, not based on any human considerations. When we experience that, the animal soul goes into shock. It's like shock treatment. And as a result of that, it becomes neutralized. But at the example that he gave in the discourse, it's like a lot of sweet water or good fresh water canceling it, bitter water, a cup or a little bottle of bitter water. It becomes completely canceled, but it's not utterly destroyed, because hypothetically, you can still, if you can separate the fresh water from the bitter water would still be in its bitterness. It hasn't really changed. And that is because the way it worked over here is that one desire overpowered another desire. A greater desire, like we find also within ourselves, that although sometimes we have very petty desires, but when something much greater is at stake, that desire dissolves as if we don't have it. But it's not that it's not really there. It really is there. It's just that right now I'm busy with something much bigger, something far more important, something of a much greater significance. But then we learned in last class that there is even a higher level where one you don't just activate your godly desire of the soul, but rather you go even deeper. You uncover your divine essence. We were learning about that in an earlier class today as well. When one uncovers the divine essence, which is the source of all desire, and that's the level of Yechida, that's the more distant encompassing power of the soul. When one reveals that dimension in their life, then a person is able to uproot the animal consciousness, the lowly base drive within the human being from its very fundamental core, and that it loses all desire because it doesn't even have any more pleasure in the unholy. Because the godly soul, when its true essence is revealed inside the body, the animal soul dissolves completely in front of that. And we learned last week in the class, we learned that's the concept that sages say, that the demon does, even though he has a shadow, he doesn't have a shadow of a shadow. Which means if we get to the rock bottom essence of the animal soul, what is it rooted in? It's not rooted in anything substantial. So there is that level, but the moment the godly essence is revealed, the godly essence completely dissolves the unholy. And it's not dissolving it in a way where it's just overpowered by a more powerful thing. It dissolves and flips over completely. And we learned the main point we were learning in last week's class, in last week's Thursday night class, was when a person reaches that level, they experience what we call equanimity. Equanimity. And equanimity means that that a person feels actually equally the same. How do you know? Pointedly, we're dealing with very strong, with subtleties. It could be that in a very, very deep subconscious level, a person still has pleasure in the worldly, in the non-godly, and you just don't know it. How do you know that you've completely uprooted that animal consciousness? This is really the level of a tzaddik. How does someone know that it doesn't exist anymore, even in the subconscious? Is if you can recognize it more, not from the pleasure side, but from the pain. Because remember, we were learning last week that pain and pleasure are the two opposite sides of the same coin. The more pleasure someone has in something, the more pain you have when you don't have it. So the ultimate level is when it comes to physical things, when a person reaches a level where it's absolutely equal whether they have it or don't have it. It just doesn't mean anything. To have a certain physical benefit, or if they don't have it, doesn't cause a dent in their level of satisfaction or joy or happiness. They can skip over even something that it was it's very much normal, and it's a comfort that they're very used to, but it's a physical comfort. It's just a material thing. It's not part of your spiritual life, it's part of your physical life. And the fact that you don't have it, you don't even bat an eye. It doesn't even mean anything. It doesn't in any way diminish your mood or weaken your life force. Like usually pains, when a person is pained by something, their life force gets weakened. Because remember, we were learning that pleasure is very much pleasure, and as a result of that, the desire that is produced by the pleasure, because when we have pleasure for something, we also have desire for it. So the desire comes from the pleasure, and the pleasure is rooted in the essence of the soul. So therefore, when someone has essentially pleasure from something, and then for whatever reason, it's taken away from them, and if it doesn't, and therefore it could possibly reduce their life force. Feel very cramped, feel diminished, feel as if there's like this part of me cut off. But if a person goes through extreme financial hardship or tremendous financial loss, for many days they can't walk out on the street because they feel they're just not. They sometimes could feel like they can't come out of bed. They feel like a piece of them has been chopped off, like they've been reduced, and because they've shrunk. It shrinks a person. But if a person has revealed their godly identity to the point that the animal soul, and then the animal soul is dissolved at its essence, so there is no more feeling at all and no more pleasure at all in the unholy or in the non-godly. And as a result of that, it's equal to them. That's the meaning of equanimity, where a person feels completely the same whether they have or they don't have. It's a very high level. So now in chapter 9 is what I'd like to learn today. Just want to finish chapter 9. Afterwards is 10, 11, which I plan on doing tomorrow. I want to just get through chapter 9 so that we want to finish this before Hanukkah is over. So now he says like this, and again, this is in Sharei HaTefillah, and the book is called Sharei Teshuvah, in the Middle Rebbe, and we're on page Nun Dalid, page 54. We're holding chapter 9. This mimer is called Padah Beshalom Nafshi. The root of this type of equanimity, it is a result, is because one has extracted, has taken away the root and the source of the life of the animal soul, meaning one has uprooted the animal consciousness to such a degree that you've nipped it in the root. You've kind of disconnected it at its very, very, very root, not somewhere further up in its growth on the more outer layers of its consciousness, but rather you're not on the level where you have already a desire and you're extinguishing the desire. Like if a person has a desire, let's see the desire like a fire. You can come and extinguish the desire, but the pilot that produced the fire is still on. It's still there in potential. It can flare up again. But in this case, you've gone deeper and extracted or excavated the animal soul at a much deeper level, which is the source of where its foreign desire comes. He calls a material, physical desire that is not related to serving God. He calls it a foreign thought, a foreign desire. So here the person has extracted it at such a deep level. Till a person doesn't have any more, the person doesn't even have the ability to have this desire. And on the contrary, the person becomes disgusted by it because they have no more feeling for it. It kind of leaves their entire scope of life. It almost becomes lifeless, meaningless, and just junk. Literally, it turns into junk. Everything that was once pleasurable, meaningful, becomes utterly insignificant and meaningless. And therefore, they become abhorred by even the thought of having that. And therefore, the person won't have any pain at all, in which if anybody does against the needs of their nature, of their natural body, and as a person has so settled in their godly soul into their body, their body becomes completely dissolved in their spiritual godly soul, and all physical sensation and needs cease to exist. And therefore, if someone does something against their physical pleasure and comfort, they don't bat an eyelash. It's nothing. And they can even be happy if it doesn't mean that there's. Later, we're going to learn there's a level where you don't even feel any pain. Over here, there might be a discomfort, but they feel joyous in it because they know it's coming from God, and if anything, it's benefiting them spiritually. And if it's benefiting from them spiritually, because all type of physical pain ultimately purifies, so they feel the benefit of the spiritual so great that they're not even bothered at all. And they receive and accept this painful experience with perfect love. Knis Kaliala said earlier. Now the root and the source of this foreign desire, this is coming from the encompassing subconscious or superconscious levels of the animal soul. Just like we said, the godly soul has 5 levels of experience. The animal soul has 5 levels of experience. So the encompassing aspects of the animal soul, which are the chaya chida of the animal soul, that's where the root of the unholy desire. This is still pre-consciousness. This is because the animal soul is an animal, which means it knows only of the physical material pleasures. So even before that's what it is in essence. So it's whatever will, when it will stir, when it will give off steam, let's see it that way, when it will start smoking and give off some kind of a steam, it will be animalistic. It will be an animalistic desire will come forth from it. So, but the root of the desire, before the desire is even here, that's called the yechida of the animal soul. And hamalubeshes begufa chumri ki yedua, that is enclosed, of this animal soul that is enclosed in the physical body, in the corporal body. But when that is flipped over, when one has flipped over their animal soul on such a deep level of consciousness, on such a deep level of soul, and they don't have any more a desire in the delightfulness of the material world, canal. And there's no more conflict. When you reach this level, you're past the conflict. We at most times have conflicts. Here we're lazy, here we're tired, here we just want to chill out and have a good ice cold beverage, ice cold beer, let's say, and we're not interested in necessarily at the moment of concentrating our mind and studying Torah or going ahead and doing a mitzvah. We want to just relax and enjoy and whatever. And we have conflict. That's constantly through life between our holy drives, our godly, where we feel purpose and mission, and therefore we feel we shouldn't be wasting our time now just sitting around there, just doing something productive. But the lazy side wants to just chill and just do nothing, or engage in something, I don't know, whatever it is. So that's where there's conflict. There's war. You'll have an argument this way, an argument that way. You're going to feel yourself wrestling with the two sides, the evil inclination with the good inclination, are battling. Once a person reaches this level of consciousness, they've uncovered and unearthed. It takes a lot of work, but you bring forth this level of soul that is so deep, where you're not just driven by holy drives, but your identity, your very sense of I, is your godly soul. And as a result of that, the animal soul dissolves at its very root. And therefore, there's no more war. If the animal soul has been challenged on the conscious level, that means you fill your consciousness with holy thoughts and holy drives. So the animal soul has been vanquished on the conscious level. There's no room, there's no space in your heart, in your emotions, and in your intelligence for anything the animal soul has to say. However, but you did not, but the animal soul's higher transcendent levels have not been dismantled. Then it's possible that right now you're doing something godly and holy and you don't even feel opposition. You don't even feel that there is some kind of pushback from the animal side, but give it an hour or so and the godly inspiration will subside. The unholy feelings will come right back. That's what he's saying over here. And then when you're not giving in to the animal soul, it's called a test, which means you still have conflict and it's a test. That's where we know the various different tests that God tests us. When the animal soul still has its yechida level and they have not been extinguished, then it's called a test. Whenever we're told or we're directed to do something holy or give up on something that is dear to us for God's sake, spend a lot of money for a mitzvah, someone needs our help, but in order to help them, it's going to cost us a fortune. And we generally like money and don't want to spend it, perhaps a little bit more of a penny pincher. And we're not comfortable splurging with money, but now there is a need and we know we should do it. So that's called a test. Why is it a test? Because you're going to experience a lot of pain while you decide to give the money away. Deep inside, you're going to feel satisfaction, but on a certain place, you feel very uncomfortable. It bothers you. So then it's called a test. When a person converts the desire for the money or whatever it is, when you're prevailing with your godly desire, or if someone has a burning desire to do a sin, but they know it's a sin, it's something that is forbidden, but it's really burning in them, it's driving them crazy, and yet they withhold and they hold back because they generate within themselves a fear of God or a love of God. And say there's like we see Joseph last week in the Torah portion, when Joseph was being seduced by the wife of Potiphar, and he had an intense desire to just go ahead and do whatever he was going to do, and then he overcame that desire. That's called a test, and it says he was tested, right? Because there was a conflict. In the classic example where it says clearly that it was a test, it says God tested Abraham. He has a child, his one and only child that he loves so dearly, and God says to him, offer him up to me. And we're talking a case where God is talking to you. It's not like there was a question. God is talking, and if God says, you do what God said. But on the other hand, he had a natural love to his child that we can't even imagine how powerful that love was. So there was conflict going on in Abraham's heart. He did it with swiftness. He did it with joy. But there was 3 days of enormous conflict taking place in his soul. But he pushed all these thoughts away and remained and stayed the course. But it was a test. That he should offer as a sacrifice his one and only son. And he had to do that, for the godly will. So God's will had to now cancel his own natural desire and love for his child. And similar cases, that comes in a manner of a test. It's like it says also in the Torah, God says, to test you, to test what's in your heart, if you're loving God with a complete love. The mashmad implies we don't know. The test means I don't know, God says. I'm testing, I'm waiting to see. Although God knows the outcome, however, he wants us to show him the outcome. Right? So it can go this way or that way, because there are 2 motives inside the person's heart. It's the war, the nefesh elokis and nefesh bahamis, where our godly self is battling with our animal self. But that is only when the battle is taking place in the internal elements of our soul. In other words, the person has not settled in their godly soul on the deepest level into their consciousness. So their space of their body is kind of indecisive. In other words, in my life right now, my body can go either way. I can either take I can take in the input from my godly soul and do the godly thing, or I can take and listen to the advice and the input from my animal soul. And where is the battle going to take place? In my mind. That's where our battles, arguments back and forth. And that's because the person has not yet completely surrendered themselves, that their godly consciousness is their only consciousness. Now, by Abraham, obviously, Abraham was a tzaddik, and by him, his only consciousness was his godly consciousness. But when God told him to take his one and only child, in a sense, it was a godly conflict, because this was a son that was going to be the father of the Jewish people. So he didn't just love Isaac because of a natural love of a father to a child. He loved him out of his godly soul. So the conflict was within the godly soul. So it's not exactly the same. But we're talking about, for most people, when it's clearly a question whether whether I will commit the sin or not commit the sin, or I will surrender my money to do the mitzvah, or make myself, or get embarrassed. Sometimes a person has to surrender their honor in order to do a mitzvah. Example for that was Yehuda last week in the Torah portion, when it turns out that this Tamar came and said that I'm pregnant to the one who these items belong to. And Judah is this famous, leader, and he could have just said, I don't know who this woman is, and then she would have been killed, and he would have been, saved his honor. But he went and he embarrassed himself publicly, and it was a very, 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 very tremendous sacrifice on Judah's sake, that he had to he was willing to forgo his honor and accept an enormous amount of shame that he was with a prostitute. It's just very, very unbefitting for him. And yet Yehuda did this because he did the right thing. But you can understand the conflict that was going on in his soul at that time. It's the 2 souls battling with each other on the level of or pnimi, of internal light. Because sometimes the animal soul takes control. But then there is a level which is beyond already tests, is where it is already absolutely decisive that the godly thing is going to happen, because the animal soul has no more say in this human being's life, because it has been completely obliterated. Where there is no more doubt. You don't have to bring the person to a test anymore. Klal. When is it already established that there's no need anymore to bring the person to a test? That is when the source of the animal soul, the source where all the earthy cravings or animal natural desires or whatever it is, whatever is producing that, the source of it has already joined the godly soul, gotten swallowed up by the godly soul. It doesn't exist anymore. So the only motivation in this person's life is going to be God's will, nothing else. They don't have no more drive anymore. There's no possibility for anything else, for any other input to come in. They're past free choice in this sense. There's no more war. Because it is essentially become nullified. The animal soul has been converted to a different nature. It too has now a divine godly nature. And then there's no more need for a test. This is the meaning of what King David says in Tehillim, in Psalms, I think chapter 22, save me from a dog, my yechida, which means allow my yechida to shine, my deepest part of my soul to shine, and then I will be forever saved from the dog, meaning from the unholiness. The yechida, the deepest level of the godly soul, that converts the converts the essence of the animal soul. And it doesn't convert it by arguing, just by merely revealing itself, then the animal soul's yechida dissipates. Then it doesn't come in a manner of victory. All it requires is the revelation of the godly soul at this level, the pure godly, the pure essence of the soul, which is purely divine. And over there is no counter. What is the animal going to say? I'm rooted in what? I'm rooted in the absence of God. Once God is revealed as God, not just a motivation, a drive to God, but God himself as the essence of the person, there's nothing that can stand against that. As stated, now he brings in the parentheses, like it says in Eitz Chaim, which is from the Ari. The Pchenas Keser, the Klippa, Batal Yoiser, that the Keser, the crown level of Klippa, is nullified to a greater degree. Because this level of Yechida corresponds to the level of crown. You see, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Nefesh corresponds to the Malchut level, to the kingship level. Ruach corresponds to the Ze'er Anpin, to the 6 emotions. Neshama corresponds to the Bina level. Chaya, the encompassing desire level, corresponds to Chachma. And Yechida corresponds to Keser. So what he's saying over here, Keser is the crown. So when the crown of holiness is revealed, the crown of the unholy is nullified completely. There is nothing to it. There's no war over there. And the root of the matter is, because this that it says that one opposite the other God made, that God created an opposing force to every force of holiness. That's in the internal structure. That means the lights that go into vessels, which means in the human experience, it means the intelligence and the emotions. So just like you can have holy intelligence, you can have unholy intelligence, you can have holy emotions, you can have unholy emotions. So when a person is operating on that level of consciousness, there is a fierce battle. However, but in the encompassing levels, the makif, the encompassing powers of the klipa, of the shells, become more integrated completely into holiness, more than their internal light, as stated elsewhere at great length. It would be worth learning that source and understanding this a little better. I didn't look it up. This is called essential nullification. There is no conflict over it, there's no war. This is called complete giving yourself over of the animal soul, not the desire of the animal soul, but the very animal soul has been given over to God. She'ein kavana, the deeper meaning of this is not ala adas haratzon, that you're giving up your desires, because that means that the pre-desire is still unholy and it could produce a new desire tomorrow. We're not talking about the rays of the animal soul, but on our very substance. But rather the very substance and the essence is essentially nullified b'pchinas bittul atzmi, with an essential nullification. Shenekra bittul legamri, which is called complete and utter nullification. V'loy bittul haratzon lavad, not only the nullification of its expression, its desire. It's not that the godly desire has overpowered another desire and canceled it. That happens when that happens, if it's the desire that's more powerful, a drive, an intense drive towards holiness that cancels the other drive, that will only be temporarily at the time of prayer. But because what's going to happen afterwards? But after prayer, it's going to re-emerge and reassert itself. But rather, this nullification, which is at the very, very essence of the animal soul, it falls apart on its own. It's not some power dissolving it. It's when it faces the ultimate truth of God revealed in the person, it just gives off. It just completely disintegrates. And once it happens, it's dismantled kind of at a cellular level, let's call it. It will never change. That it should change from will to will, like should fluctuate. That now it agrees to the holiness, and then tomorrow it will again, be attracted to its old self. It doesn't happen that way. Once this occurs, a person reaches a level of you can already at least in matters of the animal soul, you can already put your life into cruise control, because it's not going to, you don't have to worry about it anymore. It will remain that way, without any more its ability. It won't change anymore. This is called activating one's yechida, more than the rays of desire. This is the essence that is still before all desire. See, even a desire to God is already an expression. This is the substance that pre-desire, the very force of life itself. And when a person taps that and reveals that's my life, similar to what we were talking about today. Today we were even going deeper earlier in the class that we gave, the 5th class called Wake Up, because the Rebbe is basing a lot on this, but he's revealing deeper that even higher than Yechida is essence. But over here, for all practical purposes, in terms of what he's talking about over here, it's kind of the same. It's once you reach under desire to the very substance of soul itself that creates desire, and uncover that and reveal that into your body, into your consciousness, then then you are literally no more a human being. You're a divine being in this world. It's the source for all desire. And from that place, there can't be any other desires. Because the soul itself is beyond a will. So this is higher than will. And when the essence of the animal soul, I think, is referring to, becomes nullified with an essential nullification, so there cannot be any more a desire, because whatever would have caused the desire has already changed course. So there can't be any more a desire that is not towards God. The only thing the person will experience is a desire to God, a simple, continuous desire, and it's simple. It's just on this level. It's even higher than any individual desires. Even individual desires, which a person will experience later, to do this mitzvah, or to serve God like this, or to do that, or to that. This is all an outcome of the fundamental force of life that has become just your godly soul. She'ein by harkava, on this level, this desire doesn't have, and it's not mixed with anything. With tumura, it can't be exchanged, vishinoi, and doesn't have any substitution, it doesn't have any change. And this is called an essential excitement. The giving up of the soul, its very self, mikol v'kol, completely to Hashem. Like it says, kol sa nafshi, my soul is expiring to you, God. Hey, Masha Kasav Kolatz Moisai Toimarna. There's a verse that says, all my bones are saying, Mika Michael, who's like you. All the bones over here means my very essence, my very substance of being is yours, God. I don't exist outside of you anymore. Kol b'chinesa atzmi is bones over here doesn't only mean physical. Just like the bones are the skeleton, the substance of the person. After you strip everything, all the layers, and God forbid, even stripping off the skin and even flesh, what are you left? The bare human being is the bare bones. So just like it is physically that way, spiritually also, the very substance of who I am. And over here, there's not. It's beyond. It's not possible even to speak of a desire and a longing. Sha'aratzin va'chuka, because longing and desire, hudavar nivdal min etzem, is already an emergence out. It's separated from the essence. The essence is silent, unexpressed. But if all you have is your godly essence and there's nothing else blocking, then you can only be godly. And that means every experience will only be to Hashem. But the soul itself is nullified and is included and cleaves to God, to the living God, without fluctuations, without changes. Wow, it's just amazing how the Mitler Rebbe can talk about this, because he knows what it is, because he experienced it, because he's a perfect tzaddik. And people like this who are in this level, they don't have to create within themselves new desires. Because again, if the identity by us, by regular people, our essence is a mix of two souls. Deeper inside is our godly self, but it's camouflaged and coated with an animal. And the animal, who is the I? I'm a mix. I don't know who the I is. A little bit my godly self is my I, my very self, but also my animal self is my very self. So since on that level of self, I'm kind of a mix. So how do I function? In which direction is my life going? Will I go to the north or will I go to the south? Which direction am I moving? Well, the question is, which soul will produce a stronger wind? If the godly soul will produce a stronger wind, I'll move this way. If the animal soul will produce a stronger wind, I'll be blown in the other direction. So it can go either way. So, and therefore, therefore, we're not functioning on essence, we're functioning on desire. And desire is already outside of the essence. And a desire comes, and a desire doesn't last. It's like a wind blowing. Like a wind blows, then it comes down. A desire comes down. So then forget about the animal soul, even when you're following your godly soul, you're not functioning from your essence, you're functioning from the wind that the essence is blowing. As a result of that, every time you want to move yourself you want to remotivate yourself, you have to create a new desire. You have to blow a new wind. But if a person opens up their consciousness to a much deeper level of essence, the essence is always the essence, it doesn't change. It's not inspiration, it's substance. It will never change. But in this essential bond from the essence of the soul, kshura udvuka, they're tied and bond. They never have to rebond themselves to God. This remains continuously. Because they can never fall and there can't be a change. Because the essence doesn't change. Expressions change, essence doesn't change. Like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said, now who reached this level? Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, he says about himself, with one bond, I knotted myself to God. That means I knotted myself one time to God and I continued living in this one knot. I am just one with Him. Stated elsewhere. Now, even though we said earlier that Abraham had a test, that was a unique case where God tested him. But general, our patriarchs were also in this state of oneness with God. Shehena Markava, they are the chariot for God. A chariot means its identity is for one thing, to serve the rider. So there was never a moment where there was a question about, like, what's up now? What am I going to do? It was like a continuous, perpetual, non-stop state of complete servitude to God. That's their identity. Because they uncovered the essential nullification from the essence of their soul. Now he says, they were in a constant state like this. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was also uncovered this inside of himself, and he lived there all the time. Now he's going to say something interesting. It's possible for people to have a moment of this clarity, but because they didn't work to attain it, it will go away. If you work to attain it, so once you attain it, you've dug it out, it's there forever. If you don't work to attain it, and you're kind of blessed that from some kind of there's an auspicious moment above, and God blows your soul open into your consciousness, so you will experience it. But since it's not where you are at, essentially, it can go away, and then you're back to your previous self, fluctuating between the godly and the animal. But when did the Jewish people as a whole experience this level of self? Is when they said, when they said, we will do and we will hear. And when they said to God, we will do and we will hear, what does that mean? No matter what you ask of us, we will do. We don't even have to hear what you're going to ask. How do you know? Maybe he's going to ask something very difficult and you won't be able to bring yourself to do so. Maybe it will be going against everything, all your comforts, all your desires. It'll be too difficult. How can you promise God you will do and you will hear, even you never heard? The answer is, when you're in a level where your only self is your godly self, so the only thing that matters is what God wants, nothing else, no physical comfort. There's nothing else to consider but what God wants, because that's your soul. Imagine if I put it this way, if you step out of your body and God steps into your body. So is there any question if God's will is going to happen? Of course his will is going to happen, because there's nobody to conflict. So that's exactly what happens when we open ourselves up to the deepest point. Then God is our body, in our body. And then it can only be God's will. The Jewish people were in that state at the giving of the Torah. Because the desire that will come when they hear, it's coming from the Naseh, from something deeper. Another proof to this, that once this level is dug out, then all the desires that a person can have that were once completely controlling their life can instantly be canceled completely, to the point as if they're non-existent. So he's going to tell a story of a person who lived his entire life as a sinner, a serious sinner. He was literally someone who was governed by his animal cravings and desires. His fellow's name was Rabbi Elazar ben Derdaya. He literally sinned with every type of sin. Especially, he was very promiscuous. And one day he was with a prostitute, and she told him that you're finished, you're done. If there's ever a person that's going to hell, it's you, because I know how much what you're into, and you're finished. And when she said it to him, it penetrated his heart, and he realized that boy, oh boy, did he mess his life up, and he was in such pain that he ran around seeking that someone should help him, and everybody told him they can't help him. He said he turned to the heavens and the earth, and the heavens said, I can help you. I can barely take care of myself when God's judgment comes. And earth says, I can barely stand in front of God and defend myself. It says he turned to the mountains, to the valleys. He must have been a very, very unique person, that he was able to talk and get answers from all these entities. But this is what he did. And when he realized that no one can help him and he's really doomed, he just broke down crying. He felt like, how far has he gone? And he cried and he cried and he cried so much till he cried himself to death, till he died from the pain. And then he went. But what happened was at that moment, he became a new person, which means that he uncovered suddenly such a depth of his soul, basically, according to what we're learning over here, his deeper soul that was so blotted out, that was so suppressed, that was so not communicating with his consciousness throughout his life, suddenly emerged with all of its glory. And it came out so powerfully strong that we were basically saying, had this Rebbe Elazar ben Daya not had this heart attack, had he not died from his pain, he would have continued living. He would have never, ever sinned ever again. He would have never even entertained doing, even though, and any kind of sin, even though this animal self was controlling him completely all his life. How can it be that a person with so much appetite for sin and desires suddenly doesn't have it anymore? The answer is when you burst open, when you tear open your consciousness and bring out the deepest core of who you are and what you are, on that level, when that emerges, your divine self, the unholy self that is the source of all those desires, disintegrates and dissolves completely into the higher godly self. This is going to happen to all of us when Mashiach comes. And the proof to this is how all desires become nothing. When it comes to the essence, from the Baal Tshuva, from the penitent, like Rebbe Elazar ben Daya. And he says it's not only him. We find that temporarily we can have moments like this during the 10 days of repentance. The Gam Kalsha Bekalim, even people that are considered the lightheaded of the lightheaded, that it doesn't take too much seduction to get them to sin. Very quickly they can be seduced to sin. Torah, the person that has transgressed the entire Torah, mispal b'tshuva shalema. But sometimes in the 10 days of repentance, there's a very deep awakening, and they do complete tshuva. Livkais, to cry, Baseres Yemei Tshuva during that sin, it really hurts them. What do you mean it hurts you? You're enjoying so much all these sins, you're suddenly so bothered? No, but I'm in touch with a much deeper truth in me right now. This is because the Yechida, the essence Shabai, and that part has never taken part of the sin, because that's God. That has never been part of that sinful activity. It was a deeper self. It never even got scarred and never became polluted. It never became contaminated through the impurity of the sin. It remained completely safe and cut and buried deep, but in a place that the sins haven't touched it. And the simple reason is like this: because the sin doesn't come from your essence. Your essence is not interested in sinning. The sins come from a person's desires. Now, underneath that desire is the essence of the animal soul, but the essence of the animal soul is not much of a being, we said. Its main power is in its desires. So the main sin comes from desire. So when a person sins based on their desires, so it pollutes the godly soul, but only on the level of the holy desires, can get murky and filthy and contaminated from the unholy desire. But deeper than desire doesn't get affected because the sin is not taking place on the level deeper than desire. Because all the sins come from the desire and the longing of the animal soul. When the desires of the animal soul prevail and intensify over the godly soul. But they become naught and nothing. When the essence of the godly soul comes forth, the entire animal soul becomes completely dethroned, dissolved. And therefore, even after the person has already entrenched his or herself into all kinds of sins, it's never too late. That's why we never give up on a person as long as they're alive. Because if they're lucky and they can dig out, or circumstances have it, that shake them to their core, and their deepest self comes the lava, the deep lava, the under subconscious lava comes pouring out. And that's what's going to happen. Will lachziron will turn the person completely around. This is what causes the crying during the 10 days of repentance. And it comes without understanding. It's like suddenly the person doesn't even know why they start weeping uncontrollably. And the person is generally not necessarily so focused on spirituality. Suddenly they, in the middle of prayer, they break down and start crying. That's because their soul, their very godliness of their soul has popped open. Because it's the 10 days of Teshuvah, God is then, it says God comes close to everybody. So God is tugging at our deepest heart. God is pulling like a magnet. So therefore, unexpectedly, it can just come pouring out, and the person has no idea where it's coming from. They just know that suddenly they feel so intensely connected to God, and the very thought that they've been doing things that are against holiness and against is giving them so much pain that it causes them to weep. And it's, as it is known, there was one Bali Tshuva, there was one penitent. You see, what happens is, when a person has this tshuva moment, sorry, just give me a moment to get some water. When a person has this tshuva moment, and suddenly you're shook into your core, and it bothers you, and it hurts very deeply. Why? Godliness and God's will was not important to me. Why was it that I completely got distracted and completely allowed myself into all the foolish pleasures of the world at the expense of my godly soul? So it hurts very deeply. So when the person feels that pain and weeps, especially if they weep and they cry, what you're really doing is you're pulling your desire that you've had in all the unholiness, you're extracting it from those actions. And what happens is, that's tshuva, it causes all these negative powers that the person created through their sin, like we learned in the beginning of the discourse, that thoughts and all of that create entities, to suddenly dissolve, to become null. Why? Because the soul, the energy, which was the drive that drove the sin, has now been extracted, because you regret it very deeply. So you're like pulling out from all those activities. What it says, there's one problem. That works for every type of sin. Besides certain things that have a very physical effect in this world. So for instance, if a person had a sinful relationship, they were intimate with a person they weren't allowed to, and they had a child, and it resulted in a pregnancy. So if it didn't result in a pregnancy, then it remains spiritual. The physical action, but the main contamination is a spiritual one. We believe they create something very unholy in the atmosphere. So that you can undo. But if this woman then goes ahead and has a child, that means that the sin became concretized in a physical human being who's created from sin. Now, if you do tshuva, if you do repentance, and you pull the energy out, you can pull the energy out of a spiritual being, but the physical person that was born is still a human being, and they're around. And they might get married and have children and grandchildren and grandchildren. You have a whole chain of sinful people, meaning people created out of sin. That's a problem. But here he says a story that there was a person who had such deep remorse for such a sin. And when he was crying deeply, suddenly these children, it was a story, and there were actually two children. And these two children, they suddenly died. In other words, the power of his Teshuvah was so strong that he was able to pull the soul out, the life force out from these children that were a product of his own sin. This story over here is a story that happened with the Mittler Rebbe himself. The Mittler Rebbe had a chassid, someone who came to him, and he was living with a non-Jewish woman, and he had for a Jew that's a very big sin, and he had children from her. And the Mittler Rebbe, when he came to the Mittler Rebbe, the Rebbe gave him he woke up in him his soul, and he told him how to do tshuva, and he told him when he comes home, he should say the whole Tehillim, and then he should go into the snow. He should take off all his clothing, go into the snow, and say the Tehillim in the snow, without naked in the snow. And the guy was saying to him, and he was crying so much, and he was outside in the snow. The other person that was there thought he was going to die. But what happened was, as he was saying the Tehillim, and he was crying and crying, he didn't even feel the coldness. His body was getting frostbitten because he was so deeply in pain from his sins, and he was crying so deeply. His awakening was so deep. And suddenly, he was told of an accident that happened to his child. This big hot thing fell down on him, and the child was killed. And the other one, both of them died. So when he says, like it is known with a Baal Tshuva, this is a famous story that happened with one of the Hasidim of the author himself. As it is known, Baal Tshuva Echad, Shemesu Banav, that his sons, Hanaylodim Mechatav, that were born from his sins, Ba'oisa Hasha, at that time, Shebacha B'mar Nefesh, that he cried with the bitterness of his soul, Achenes Aleph, until he fainted. And Vigam Sheneslapshu Begufim, and even though the sin became enclosed, these energies became enclosed in physical bodies, yet he was able to extract it. Because when the essence is revealed, it's the source of all desire. All the desires can be canceled by that essence. Because all the corporal desires, all these lowly, physical, earthy desires, they're only an expression from the essence of the animal soul. Because we have an animal being whose life is animalistic and therefore enjoys physical pleasure, so it produces desire for physical pleasure. But if a person doesn't cancel the desire, but rather cancels the animal soul itself, the life of the animal soul itself becomes dissolved in the life of the godly soul, because one reveals the essence of life itself, of their godly soul, which causes the essence of the animal soul's substance of being to become nullified. Then there's no more desire anymore. That all desires are canceled. It's as if they lose their very source where they're plugged into. The power has been shut down. And when the essence of the animal soul ascends, oilin gamheim, these energies, all these desires are also elevated. And they become absorbed and included in the animal soul that is now going up and joining the godly. Like sparks that go into a big blazing fire. King David is praying that he should experience this level of Yechidah should open up in his soul. And then there's no more impurity left over, not even a trace. So when a person now serves God on this level of Yechidah, which is the essence, as we said earlier, then there's no more war. Because then even after prayer, even when the person walks out into the marketplace, where there is possible temptation, where there is possible stuff that might be, attractive, that are not the godly. Begates almavis, even when they walk in the shadows of death. In this case, death over here means godless environments. They don't have to fear that they're going to experience negativity. Means I don't fear. It comes from the verse of Psalms 23. Even when I walk in the shadow of death, I don't fear evil. Here he's learning it not as a physical threat, but as a spiritual threat. When a person goes to places where there is a possibility for some kind of impure seduction, but we don't have to be afraid. Why? Because because evil cannot exist where God is. And since in their heart God has now fully manifested, there's nothing to fear anymore. Uksivin, it says, Kehimes doineg, like wax that melts in front of fire. You're lighting your Hanukkah candles, we light with oil, but Shamus, the one that's lighting, we usually use a candle. You can see how the wax just melts away and drips in front of the fire. So once you turn on God in your soul, all the klipa, all the unholy just melts away. And this is the meaning of the perfect tzaddikim who have undressed from themselves all physical attachment. They have zero connection to physicality. Doesn't mean they don't have a physical body, but they don't, matters of the material physical don't speak to them at all. This is also the root, as we discussed earlier, of equanimity. Because the root of all foreign desire was pulled. You pulled out the carpet from under its feet. You don't have to bring a person to a test at all. As we said earlier. The Adam Kazan, this person who B'Tselem Elokim Mamish, this person is literally the image of God. Because all that there is just godly soul there. There's no blockages. So the divine is fully coming through in their body. People who have not reached this also have a divine godly image. But the godly image is buried in the animal self. That's why it says that there are tzaddikim, there are certain righteous people that when they're faced by any wild beast, the wild beast is terrified from them. They run away from them or they bow down to them because God created the human to be the king of the jungle, the king of the animals. But when the human doesn't look like human because their godly light is not shining, their godly form, their godly image. So it's only when a person opens themselves up that their entire identity is now their soul, and the animal soul therefore becomes dissolved. There's no blocking anymore. So the godly soul is completely interfacing with their body. Because this is pure divine, which is in the level of Yechida, which is higher even than the level of Chaya, because Chaya is still, you're still experiencing yourself as a creation that's loving God, driven to God. But here we're dealing deeper. I'm not loving, I am Him. Because the Chaya level is a makiv lipnimi. It's an encompassing light to the pnimi. It's higher than our limited powers, our human faculties. It's more of the soul's properties, purely so, but it's not the essence. But rather, Yechida is much deeper. The level of Yechida is attached to God continuously. And this is where the Zohar says, the nefesh kitechta tava. The Zohar wonders, how can a soul sin? That means a person who's on this level, it's a wonder, it's not possible for them to sin. But on the level of Chaya, even a person who is driven with this mad drive to godliness, there can still be a test. Like it says by Abraham, God tested it. There still can be a possibility this way or that way, because we are operating on a level of desire. So if there can be holy desire, there can be unholy desire that can challenge us. And all of this is back into parentheses over here. And that is because the concept of one opposite the other, chaser b'chinas yechida. The yechida is not there. Shu b'chinas makif the makrif. Remember we said that the animal soul doesn't have a strong yechida. The encompassing to the encompassing, shenikra tzel tzila, which is called the shadow of the shadow. And this is what it says in the Talmud in Tractate Masechtas Gittin, that when you remember we discussed it in last class, you can listen to the reference over there, that when you hear someone say, and the person is in a pit, please be my agent and write a divorce for my wife, you're allowed to do so as long as you can see the person. So the Talmud asks, but maybe the person is a demon. So when you're looking down, you're seeing a person there, but maybe it's not. So the Talmud says, you see that he has a shadow. Demons don't have shadows. And then the Talmud says, but demons do have shadows. So it says, no, you saw not just a shadow, you saw the shadow of the shadow. So this deep teaching of the Talmud, and demons don't have a shadow of a shadow. What that means is that the other side, the unholy, doesn't have this very lofty level of existence. Last look. It says by when the spies came to spy in the land of Israel, and they saw the powerful forces of the inhabitants that were living in the land of Israel, and they came back and they gave a negative report. So Kalev and Yeshua, the two spies that did not sin, they said, we don't have to be anything. We don't have to be afraid of these powers. Their shadow was removed from them. What does that mean? That they're not plugged into anything real. See, when a person is plugged in on this level of life, that's real. They're not plugged in. There's no shadow there. This is this level. Then they're like animals. They're no more the human, the image of God that's supposed to be on a human. And being that the Jewish people did have their image of God, so they knew that the 7 nations that were living across the Jordan River on the other side are going to scatter before them. And a human can run after animals. That's why one can chase 1,000. Abnormally, Hashem should help that the IDF God should activate this level of self, the godly self in the IDF, like the story of the Maccabees. And the Hamas definitely don't have this level of soul revealed in them. So they're like animals, let them run and be scattered. And this is also the reason why the substance of the animal soul flips over, becomes completely nullified. Because in the yachid of the godly, because the godly soul is human, the animal soul is animal, and animal completely surrenders in front of the human. So when you open yourself up to the true human inside of human over here means the godly, then and therefore the root of life, of the energy that motivates all negative desire, has been swept away from under its feet. There's no more desire there because there's no more animal soul there left anymore. This is called love God with what it says in Shema, love God with all your might, which is much higher than loving God with all your heart, loving God with all your soul, love God with all your might. All your might means give it your entire being. Open yourself up to your essence. And when that happens, you become consumed with only God, nothing else. Which is beyond the Mesiras Nefesh of all your soul. For behold, when it says you should love, it means it comes from the word desire. Which is talking about conscious desire that is filling one's mind and heart. The regular vahafta means you're feeling a drive, where in your mind and in your heart, you're experiencing a conviction, and that's translating into a desire. It's called pnimi, internal desire. But it's limited based on our human faculties. But that's the first thing. Love God with all your heart. Then it says, with all your heart, with all your soul. With all your heart means with both your inclinations. Subdue the animal soul. And even get it to agree to the godly soul based on an argument, but it's very temporary. Open up yourself to even a higher level. Introduce the crazy love that your soul has naturally to God. That's more than your human faculty, your human mind can create. That's a powerful love. That's called without an end. That's far more powerful than the internal light that comes into a vessel. which that converts the animal soul and knocks it out in its essence. Like we said, remember, when you experienced in the beginning of the class, we said when you experience this transcendental love, which is beyond reason and beyond understanding, it shocks the animal soul, but it doesn't convert it. It shocks it. That's why it will be completely knocked out. It seems like it's gone, but it's only temporarily. It's only at the time of the intensification of the godly desire, which is emanating from the level of chai of the godly soul. But then it can revert back. The unholy desires can return. This is called war and victory, or a test canal, because there is a back and a forth. But then he says, love God with all your ma'od. This is a much deeper level of limitlessness. This is limitlessness in its essence. Like it is limitless in its essence. And there's two levels of without an end. One is that it's compared to the excitement that the mind can create, which is a very limited excitement. The natural desire of the soul is called limitless, but that's not the real limitlessness, because it's still an expression of the soul. It's not the essence of the soul. Deeper than that is the essence of the soul. When it says that a person has a tzelem elokim, an image of God, the word tzelem is made up of three letters, tzadik, lamed, mem. So tzadik is the indwelling powers, the neshama, nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is the powers of reason and understanding. It's the limited part of the soul. And the lamed and the mem are the two encompassing powers. Lamed is the encompassing lower power, and the mem is the higher power. And this is the yechida. It's not an makif lipnimi. It's not an encompassing relative to the internal powers. It's the essential essence, and therefore it's limitless in its oneness with God. It never changes. It never falls. If this is revealed inside of us, and over here we can't speak of war at all. Once the essence is converted to God, there's no conflict. There's no back and voices. And it is enough to those who understand. We finished chapter 9, Baruch Hashem. And then we are going to still finish in next class, 10, 11, and 12. It's not too long. It's 1, 2 pages. The next class will probably be 2 hours. We'll finish it. Be'ezrat Hashem, and we will have made a siyum on this amazing discourse. Thank you for joining, and let us have a really happy Hanukkah.